How was that for you when you obviously went there and made the decision and that's what I'm going to do, but then ultimately you throw all your possessions into the back of a van or a truck or something like that and arrive in Bozeman. Like that's the that's the archetypal culture shock of one to the other. What was that first few weeks like when you got there?
Well, actually, I didn't have a car in New York. Obviously, taking the subway and doing some of those rent a bike deals. So I flew with basically everything I owned. And so I was wearing, like four shirts and like two jackets. I was wearing my snow boots on the airplane, two hats. It was really actually ridiculous moving through the airport. And actually, the day that I left was actually when the American TSA, I think it's Transportation Security Administration, they were on strike. So the line to leave literally maybe took 3 hours just to get to the security at the airport. So I was carrying all this heavy stuff. I was sweating and in pain. My shoulders hurt. But when I moved here, it was actually in the middle of a polar vortex. So it was in the mornings when I'd wake up to scrape my car to go to work. It was like minus 40,
Oh,
getting into that ballpark. And I don't know what that is in Celsius, so I
minus
apologize. But it's
minus 40 is minus 40 in both. It's where Fahrenheit and Celsius join together.
okay. So there you go. It was really, really cold, and I didn't know anyone really. I had some friends of friends, but it wasn't like I could just kind of get out and go hiking and kind of enjoy the nature either. So it was a little bit depressing, if I'm being honest. Um, but I figured, I obviously I'd make friends in time and the weather would clear up. And, at that, for example, everyone skis in the winter. So that's kind of one of the great parts about being in Montana. At that temp, you're not really getting out to do that either. So culture shock is definitely an understatement. It was a massive lifestyle adjustment. And then things started clicking. I started making buddies and I just said yes to every social event that I could get my hands on. And now it's, I've got people I climb with and people I ski with and friends to go out to bars with and just a really solid group of people to be around. Actually, a lot of them too have moved from markets like New York City, maybe smaller cities where they've moved from Baltimore or they've moved from Seattle or Chicago, but and a couple friends that were definitely born and raised here, but it's got just a little bit more of a laid back factor that I needed. And I'm glad to see that my hunch of it being that way is definitely answered as a reality.
Mm. It's interesting when you move somewhere slower, if you can keep hold of your 60% of your work ethic or 70% of your productivity ethic from a New York, and you move somewhere slower, you actually can stand out as almost a genius. Probably neither of us are geniuses, but
I'm definitely not.
no, me neither. But the pace is when you take one speed and put it into a slower pace environment, you kind of achieve more than a lot of other people do in that environment, even though it feels slower for you. And certainly for me, moving from the UK to South Africa, the pace of business in South Africa is probably 30 or 40% of the pace of business in London. And so I just took my London attitude and moved here, reduced it a bit so I could chill out some more. And it's very strange that people are like, how do you get all that done in that short a time period? And I'm like, well, I thought I was being lazy.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. And I do have a bunch of coworkers who again, I've worked two jobs here in Montana. And I've had coworkers that came from larger markets, and some of them brought a lot of what you were just describing with them. And I think that I did too. And it definitely helps. It helps develop yourself as a standout, or however you want to put it. It definitely sets you a cut above. I did actually have people I worked with who lived in those bigger markets who just said never again. And they came and adopted a very slow style, but they had just enough of that, big city cunning to make sure that, they're staying out of it while looking involved. So it's kind of funny actually. I've had a couple coworkers like that did nothing, but it kind of looks like they do. Um, the biggest thing that I brought from New York that, a piece of mentality was actually things are obviously a lot cheaper here. And I, in New York, found myself often working on a pretty extreme budget, eating a hot dog or dollar slice or whatever. And I shouldn't complain because I know that's a lot more than even a lot of people have anywhere in the world. But coming to Montana, I'll still, a pint of beer in New York can easily cost $10 with tax and tip. Here in Montana, it can be as cheap as $3 with tax and tip included. There's no sales tax, so it's really just $2 plus a tip if you want to give a 50% tip, which
which is pretty generous.
on $2 is not really that big of a deal, but it's a pretty crazy thing to walk around Montana still kind of having a little of that sticker shock PTSD, thinking that everything's really expensive when it's not at all. So, but it's a lot of, as more people are moving here during the pandemic, I mean, the housing market here has definitely gotten a lot more expensive. So I wouldn't be surprised to see things like beer prices, for example, getting more expensive as rents perhaps get more expensive, commercial rents. I do know that there is on sort of that subject, I know that there's sort of I think it's called a Big Mac index, and you can actually kind of, yeah. So I like to think of a Pint of Beer Index. So as long as I can get a pint for $2 to $4, I'll be pretty happy.
I often, for a number of years, measured my success in life in how many pints of beer I earned by the hour.
There you go.
That's it. So if like this year I can afford 4 pints by the hour, but next year I can afford 5 pints by the hour, I'm winning at life.
Well, you don't want to definitely take your earnings and go directly convert it into those pints, or you might lose that job.
I don't know. I think when I was your age, I may well have tried that on several weeks.
Well, I can tell you there's weekends here and there where that's definitely the case.